On today's show, the Hawks lose their third straight game, fall to 18-26 on the season. We'll get into all of what transpired in San Francisco and what became a two-game winless road trip to California, and we'll get into all of that right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1637 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you deep into the night here on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, if you're a new customer, get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Also, at the top of the podcast, I should encourage you to make us your first listen each and every day. Please subscribe to the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple and Spotify on the audio side, as well as YouTube on the video side. And today's show will focus on what became a third straight loss for the Hawks in an 0-2 road trip. They fall to 18-26 in the season with a 134-112 loss on the road against the Warriors. They were underdogs to tip off in this game pretty solidly, according to our friends at FanDuel, and they trailed for the majority of the game. Although it was close in the middle, it was competitive, at least somewhat competitive until the fourth quarter, and then they kind of never made a run, though, in the second half. They got rocked by 21 points after halftime on the way to the 22-point final margin in this game. And as you might expect, this is kind of a all-quadrant loss for the Hawks. Trae Young did miss this game. He's stuck in the concussion protocol. I think there's a decent chance he's back on Friday, but nothing official at this point in time. People asking about timelines. The NBA is kind of intentionally not setting timelines on concussion protocol stuff. You have to test out of it. We knew he'd be out for this trip because he would not travel with the team, but Friday's a home game. Anyway, with him out, Bruno Fernando was out in this game with back spasms. DeAndre Hunter, who the Hawks do miss, was out in this one, and they had 11 guys active in the game. The Warriors have not been playing all that well recently, and they actually had not played a game in more than a week due to the tragedies surrounding their team after losing an assistant coach about a week ago. But look, this is a game that the Hawks just did not play very well in. If you asked me before the game if the Hawks were going to win, I would say possibly, but not super likely to do so. And in the first half, it was going reasonably well. In the second half, not as much. And the Warriors are the better team on paper, even though they're not playing great right now. Take Trae away and put the game in San Francisco, and obviously things lean to the Warriors. That was the case in this one. But still, it was kind of a offensive and defensive loss, a kind of an all-quadrant loss. And in a lot of ways, though, it might have been how stark the bench struggles were. Aside from Patty Mills making some shots in the first half, the Hawks stars were kind of okay in this one. The bench was not okay in this one. We'll go to the offense first, though, which kind of fell apart after halftime. I will say on the positive side, the Hawks' offense was pretty good, especially without Trae in that first half, about 1.3 points per possession before halftime. Unfortunately, they were still down one at the break despite all of that, but the second half was really gross on offense. I would argue, if you said, both halves are, separate, I would say the worst thing that the Hawks did in this half was their second half offense. They scored 44 points after halftime. They had an 89.8 offensive rating after halftime. Just for reference, if you're not into all these numbers, the league worst offense is 105, and the Hawks were at about 90, essentially, after halftime. They were 15 of 44 from the field after halftime, 3 of 17 from three, which speaks for itself. They missed 6 free throws after halftime. The only guy who shot better than 40% from the field, which is also bad in itself, after halftime was Okongwu, who was actually just 2 for 2 from the field. So, pretty rough stuff there, and when you kind of contrast that with the first half, they ended up with about a 112 offensive rating in this game, which isn't a total disaster. If you say, no Trae, that's a pretty reasonable number for the Hawks to score, but it felt pretty brutal by the end. They shot 41% from the field in the game, 33% from three. They did have 30 assists in this one, and only 11 turnovers, and they did win the glass. They took more free throws than the opponent, but the shooting swings were really all against the Hawks in this one. And, contrary to previous years where the Warriors were this great shooting team, yes, they have Steph and Clay. They don't have great shooting necessarily. And the Hawks are not great as a shooting team either, especially without Trae. But mostly, by the way, Trae's a good shooter, also just setting shots up as a great passer. But regardless, the offense is they just didn't have enough juice in the second half of this one. DeJounte was fine. He carried usage. He was the leading scorer with 23 points. But everybody else, Joe Johnson had a big first half. He cooled off in this one. The perimeter shooting was okay until the second half, but not a lot going to the rim from the Hawks in this game. And they did have 6 guys in double figures, but again, aside from Jalen Johnson's first half, no one was like truly excellent for Atlanta in this one. And you kind of felt that across the board as the offense sputtered out, first with the bench and then with the starters even when they came back in the fourth quarter. Defensively, it was not very good the entire way, to be honest. They had a 133 defensive rating in the game. That's rough in any context, obviously. The Warriors are not great offensively this year. Yes, they have Steph, but they're not fantastic. And they scored at least 31 points in every single quarter in the game. If you're looking for a positive, the Hawks were pretty good on the glass in this game on both ends of the floor, and they actually allowed only 22 free throw attempts, which is rock solid, I would say. But I thought about how poorly the Hawks shot the ball in the second half. Golden State was the opposite. They shot 59% from the field after halftime, 15 assists. For the game, they were 49% from three. That was a huge swing, apparently, especially when compared to the Hawks' ugliness from three after halftime. 10 turnovers, 56% from the field. My favorite stat, or maybe my least favorite stat, depending on how you want to frame that, I would say, is that the Warriors, according to our friends at Cleaning the Glass, and they do a great job pulling these interesting, nuanced stats, the Warriors, according to them, scored 2.14 points per possession in transition in the game. So essentially, they scored more than 2 points every time they had a possession where it was not just a half court, like when they had some sort of advantage in the transition game. That is horrific. That is 99th percentile, basically the best you could possibly be. And the Hawks were just awful defensively in transition. Now, it's not always going to show up in fast break points. That's a useful metric, but sometimes scores, and it's kind of tough to like say what's a fast break versus transition in a lot of ways. The Warriors, this is one of those. This is part of that stat. The Hawks only had 11 turnovers in the game, which is actually quite good, but they led directly to 22 points, which, by the way, 2 points per possession there. That's part of what transpired in transition, but it wasn't even necessarily getting back. I know Lauren Williams of the AJC asked Quinn after the game in San Francisco basically about the transition defense, and Quinn talked about like it wasn't like not getting back, and I tend to agree. Like, it wasn't like they were not getting back effort-wise. It was just execution-wise. Perhaps the most glaring aspect of that, we'll probably come back to later on, but there was a trip in the first half where Steph Curry, by far the number one guy on the scouting report for the Warriors, was able to dribble the ball up in transition without the ball being stopped at all. Like, bogey turned around and was going the other way. Like, it was just bizarre execution. And look, it was an emotional scene in San Francisco, especially for Bogey in particular for the Hawks. If you missed all of that from last week, he was close with the assistant coach for the Warriors that passed away. So I'm sure he was, in a million different places tonight. It wasn't just him, but they just did not execute at all in defensively in really any aspect. There was some reasonable rim protection in this game when they got there, but anyway, it was rough. It wasn't like the starters were great again, but by the time like garbage time arrived, the Hawks were like minus in the single digits on all the starters. Basically, they were beat starters versus starters, but not in a significant way. But the bench was truly bad. They got annihilated. The Hawks wasted some opportunities, I thought, in the second half in particular with the Warriors when it was still competitive, and the Warriors are not great. Steph Curry is the centerpiece and everything for the Warriors, and they actually won his non-minutes, him on the bench minutes by like double digits. That can't happen if you're trying to win the game on the road. But look, what I would say at the end of this sort of segment is this game is another reminder of kind of where the Hawks are. And I will always say, like, without Trae, it's not like you're evaluating the full Hawks team, but the depth concerns were there. All of the defensive concerns were there in a lot of different ways in this game. And it's a reminder to me about like why this team is open for business when it comes to trade stuff. I've done a lot of trade interviews in other places, Laker shows and radio stations and Knicks stuff and all that. And like, it's just reminder after reminder that there's a reason why this Hawks team is kind of in this phase right now where they can kind of go any direction. And it's because they're 18-26. Like, I know they'd be in the play-in right now if the season ended, but they'd be the 10 seed. They don't feel like a play-in team. They feel like worse than that, to be honest with you. And again, you have to acknowledge that without Trae and DeAndre Hunter, who does matter on this team, they would be a lot worse than they are even overall. And that was the case in this game. But man, it was, the first half was like kind of a pleasant surprise. They were playing pretty well on offense, etc. And then the second half arrived, and then it's just like, you want to put too much on one half, but it was rough stuff. And end of a weird road trip. I will certainly acknowledge that. some schedule stuff that was not kind to the Hawks in the last week. But the results are what they are. They're 18-26, and pretty frustrating times if you are a Hawks fan, I'm sure, at this point in time. I've heard from a lot of you already. I'll probably hear from more of you. But if you're wondering why the Hawks are open for business, this is probably another reminder and indication of why that happens to be. All right, we'll have more on this game when it comes to how it unfolded, my observations during the game, and at the end of the podcast, my player analysis. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show. Today's show is brought to you by Hungry Root. Are you trying to eat healthier this year? I know I am, and Hungry Root is here to help you out by making meal planning easy and nutritious. With Hungry Root, you can build habits around eating healthy that will not disappear by the month of February. They have support for gluten-free and vegan and vegetarian, dairy-free, and low-carb options, plus more. And customers of Hungry Root also save money on groceries. When you eat out less, you save money and you save time. Hungry Root is the easiest way to get fresh and high quality foods delivered directly to your door. They have healthy groceries as well, and simple recipes all in one place. Take a fun short quiz with Hungry Root right now, and they'll get to know you, your goals, and how you like to eat your food. They'll ask you what kind of flavors you like, which appliances you happen to use, and more. And then they'll keep your needs and preferences top of mind and start building around your carts with delicious recipes and all the grocery needs that you actually need for your week. They'll then recommend recipes and groceries based on your taste. You can take the suggestions if you want to, or choose anything that you want, from fresh produce to high quality meats and seafood, healthy snacks, and much more. And they go beyond your weekly grocery haul with thousands of easy recipes to put groceries to good use before they get actually forgotten in the back of your fridge. And at Hungry Root, there are some pillars. Everything has to taste good, be quick to make, and also contain whole, trusted ingredients. Spend less time meal planning, shopping, and cooking, and more time enjoying the healthy food that you absolutely love with the folks at Hungry Root. And right now, Hungry Root is offering Locked On Hawks listeners 40% off your first delivery and free veggies for life. And the place to go is hungryroot.com/lockedon to get 40% off your first delivery and get your free veggies. One more time, that is hungryroot.com/lockedon. Don't forget to use that link so they will know that we sent you to them. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And at eBay Motors, they have everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They have superchargers and roof racks and exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered across the board. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for at eBay Motors. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and, of course, not burning cash. With all the parts that you need at prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win that you are seeking. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible as only. Exclusions apply. All right, and to how this game unfolded, and I will say it was emotional at the top of the game on really all sides. The Warriors, of course, playing their first game in 9 days, paying tribute to Decky, the assistant coach who passed away last week unexpectedly. I mentioned Bogey before, but also Hawks assistant Igor Kokoskov was close to him as well. I heard a lot from people that were there about how there were not any dry eyes in the house before tip-off. There were some players visually crying before the game, like tough stuff in a lot of ways and a challenge for the Warriors, I'm sure. And the Hawks did start this game well, actually. They actually scored on the first 4 possessions. They had 10 points, a 3 by by Bay, 1 by Murray, buckets to the rim from Capella and Johnson. The Hawks made their first 5 shots in this one, and it was like, all right, here we go. And then the Hawks missed their next 13 shots and fell behind. So the first quarter was mostly literally the Hawks going 5 for 5, 0 for 13, and then making 3 shots in a row after that. Just a wild stretch of time. That aforementioned possession that I talked about first in this podcast, about the one where Steph kind of just waltzed down the court by himself. That happened in that first quarter run with the Warriors taking the lead. Luckily, Golden State was kind of cold early in this one. They were 7 of 18 from the field at the outset, but they were down 7 at the end of the first quarter despite making 7 threes. Not usually good when you make 7 threes in a quarter and you're losing, much less by 7 points. But the Warriors were getting whatever they wanted to on offense. Rotationally, it was the same 9 guys who had been playing for the Hawks for a while, with Trae out and, of course, with Hunter out. Not much to add there. There was Patty Mills, who actually was hot early in this game, actually made his first 2 threes and helped out a lot on offense. But everybody else kind of struggled off the bench. I thought, just for me, Trent Forrest has his weaknesses in general. I didn't like playing Trent Forrest without Steph on the floor in this one. And I'm sure it was just the way the rotation broke down. They've been kind of playing Trent with Murray off the court in these non-Trae games. But I would have tried to, at least if you were going to have to play Trent, I think they probably did want to play Trent in this game. having him defend Steph is the way to kind of like get actually some value out of Trent because his offense is so limited, but they didn't really do that, which I didn't love in this one. They were down by 10 early in the second quarter, but they actually kind of went a nice run after that. Jalen Johnson had a great skip pass to Patty Mills for a corner three, and he finished at the rim very strongly. Patty got a steal, and the bogey hit a three, and they were suddenly back within one. The Hawks were 9 of 20 from three in the first 15 minutes of this game, which is huge volume, and also shooting the ball very well. But 9 of 20 became the next 23. The rest of the game was 5 of 23. So they got colder and also took less of them as the game went along. But the bench was actually heaving threes early on. They played a little bit of two-center lineup tonight with Capella and Okongwu. It did okay. Didn't dominate, but it was just all right, I would say. In this, they had actually one great possession at the end of the first half. They had this, it was actually with the starters back in the game, where Capella found Bogey on a kick-out pass. Then he swung it to Murray, who swung it to Bay for a corner three that was wide open. He made it. It was really pretty basketball in a lot of ways. And there were more of that. There was a nice run at the end of the half as well, but Jalen Johnson kind of keyed that one with a 7-0 run at the end. Capella had two great defensive possessions in a row. One where he kind of stonewalled Steph Curry in space one-on-one. That was a nice throwback to his Houston days, I would say. Hawks got a steal on that play when Jalen kind of went trapped, and they got a steal on the backside. So they played well at the end of the half. Down one at halftime. I gave all those numbers earlier, but they shot the ball incredibly well in that first half. 11 assists in the second quarter. They had a 37-point quarter in the second quarter, which is a lot of points in any way. So 37 points in a quarter without DeJounte Murray scoring a point in the quarter. Again, the Hawks' best offensive quarter in this game was without DeJounte scoring, which is already weird in itself. And then you throw in the fact that Trae didn't play in this game, and if you told me that the Hawks had a 37-point quarter without DeJounte scoring a point, that would have been like genuinely shocking. And how about this? DeJounte led the team in scoring in this game and did not score in a quarter, and it was that quarter that had the best offense. It was just a weird setup across the board there. Really, the best half by anyone for the Hawks in this game was the first half by Jalen Johnson, who had 17 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists before halftime. Now, he cooled off a lot, but that was his first career half with at least 15, 5, and 5, and I'm sure there'll be more of those in the future. The Warriors did shoot better than the Hawks did still in the first half, but as I sort of alluded to earlier, the second half, not as kind in a lot of ways. I thought defensively they actually played pretty well early in the third quarter, and actually took a small lead for the only time in the entire game, really. But then Golden State found it first. The Hawks were not making any shots before DeJounte found them at a three to kind of break a drought in the middle of the third quarter. But they kind of fell apart late in the third, a 7-0 run by the Warriors to kind of go up by 10. They had a shot clock violation in there that was pretty rough stuff offensively. Bogey made a three late in the quarter. That was kind of like the only positive in the last few minutes of that period. They lost that with Steph on the bench, as I said before as well. They were kind of fortunate, I thought, to be down only 9 at the end of the third quarter, despite scoring less than a point per possession. But it kind of didn't let up from there. They're down 15 points by the 8-minute mark of the fourth quarter. Patty had a terrible turnover about midcourt that led to a pretty easy one. Again, just got smashed with the bench on the floor. Garrison and Trent in particular were really rough. It got a little better when the starters came back in. It kind of stabilized, but when you're down 15 points in the fourth quarter, you can't just stabilize. You have to actually make a run. That didn't actually happen. And then they got down 20 with like 5 minutes to go. There was a sequence where the Warriors won a challenge on a goaltending call. It took 2 points off the board. And then Steph made a three right after that. That was kind of the dagger. Like, it was probably already over, but that was really kind of when it was officially over for me. And by the end, it was all garbage time. They brought in Seth Lundy and AJ Griffin for the last couple minutes of this one. And all the way to the end. So second half, 65-44 in favor of Golden State. And that tells you the story, honestly. The first half was not bad from the Hawks. They played them pretty much to a draw. And again, as a 6.5, 7-point underdog in this game in the betting market, to be kind of pushing at halftime, be in a game is not a bad place to be. And in the second half, they got absolutely walked out of the building in a lot of ways. And that is explaining what transpired in this one. All right, I'll have some player stuff coming up in a second when it comes to how bad the bench was, how good the starters were, at least in relative terms, compared to the bench. Before we get to that, though, a word from our sponsors on the podcast today. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and the NFL playoffs are here and ongoing, and there's still time to get on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet at FanDuel. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose, and the FanDuel Sportsbook app It's so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet at FanDuel. They have live same-game parlays. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best place and the best way to find popular parlays available at FanDuel. Also find bets in the new Explore tab, and they have all the old favorites as well: point spreads, over-unders, money lines, player props, future bets, and much more. The app is safe, it's secure, and they cover the entire range of sports at FanDuel Sportsbook. They have the NFL, of course, NBA, of course, college sports, MLB when sort of in season, WNBA, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA. It's all there for you at FanDuel. And they also have all the stuff you're looking for with the Hawks. That includes the full slate of offerings on each and every game, plus player reward stuff, future bets, and much more. And now is an awesome time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a layup with FanDuel Sportsbook. One more time, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, and to the player analysis in this game, not a ton to be excited about, I have to just say, as you might expect, in a lopsided loss. Lundy and Griffin got in late. Not really much to add there. They were in total garbage time. Trent Forrest played 15 minutes. Did have 5 assists. Some nice passes, had 2 steals, good solid defense, but his offense was certainly not great in this one. That's not a huge surprise if you watch the game. He does hurt them in a lot of ways, and there's limitations. There's a reason why Trent Forrest, as much as I appreciate his skill set, was available on a 2-way, and it's because he's a very, very, very limited offensive player. And basically asking him to be the point guard without DeJounte is not going to work, and it didn't work in this game. Garrison Matthews. I will say, Garrison's been playing very well lately. That shouldn't be lost. He'd been giving them really good minutes in the last week, 2 weeks, something like that. Like, he'd been giving them a lot of good games. He was the worst player for the Hawks in this game. He was really bad. Minus 23, and that's not the reason why I'm saying that, but like, he was... That backed it up. He was 0-6 from 3, 1 of 7 from the field, 3 points, had a turnover and an assist, no rebounds. Defensively, he was beat up a little bit by Jonathan Kuminga and others. By the way, Kuminga was 11 for 11 from the field in this game. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to pile on Garrison, who again has been giving them pretty good minutes, but he was really bad in this one. And I think the combination of the bench guys, that just didn't work at all in this one. And Garrison was the one that stuck out the most for me. Patty Mills made shots in the first half, hit 3 threes, and second half he was really bad too. So in the first half he kind of buoyed them with that shot making, but after halftime that lineup with Trent, Patty, and Garrison, we'll leave it there for now. Patty gave him good effort defensively, but was not quite as effective, let's just say, after he stopped making all the shots that he made in the first half. And then Okongwu had a rough night too. I don't think he was very good. He was better at times in the second half, but I thought he was kind of a 0 in the first half. 6 points, 7 rebounds. 3 turnovers for too many for him. 3-5 from the floor. He was, not a total disaster, but was not very good in this one. To the starters, Capella, 11 points, 11 rebounds for Clint, had a block. He was all right other than the finishing around the rim. He was 3 of 9 from the floor in this game. I thought he was pretty good, actually, in the middle of the game. He had a rough start, like a pretty rough first quarter. I thought he was kind of heavily responsible, at least part of the responsibility for the nice run in the second quarter. But, mixed bag game. I thought the centers were just, as a whole, Capella and Okongwu were not particularly good in this one. Capella was a little bit better, I thought, than Okongwu, but still not a huge gap. And they needed more from those guys, although they were better with this. Actually, Clint had the best plus-minus on the team in this one. It was -4 in 25 minutes. Saddiq Bey. If you want to find a bright spot, Saddiq Bey made a few shots in this game. 18.7 rebounds. That's obviously fine, but the big thing is, I've been talking about this a lot recently. Saddiq coming into tonight, in the previous 22 games, was 35 of 141 from 3. That is 24.8%. He has been, in what I've described, and accurately, I think, if you look at the numbers, the worst shooting slump of his NBA career. And tonight, he was 3 of 6 from 3. Now, he was 3 of his first 4, so he missed the last 2, but him making 3 threes, seeing the ball go in, I don't want to overstate it, but certainly that's a small positive for this night. And obviously, there was kind of this debate happening today about whether Saddiq should, quote-unquote, stop shooting. My personal opinion, I think the opinion of the team almost certainly is going to be like, he cannot stop shooting. And I know it's frustrating, but a guy like Bey in particular gets a lot of his value by being a floor spacer. And yeah, it'd be great if he made shots, but the minute you stop shooting, the minute you don't have confidence and you're kind of record scratching when you get the ball, then defenses don't have to guard you, and that hurts everybody else. So I like that he kept shooting in this game, and I think that hopefully the results will improve because, like I said before, on recent days, he's a better shooter than this. He's not a great shooter, I don't think. He's a good shooter, but certainly not this. And I think some positive signs there if you are looking for something bright to come out of this game. Jalen Johnson, awesome first half. not great second half, which is kind of the whole team. So I'm not picking on Jalen. He had up with 21 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, no turnovers. So some really good passes. I will say Jalen made a couple of really high-level reads, high-level deliveries. It helps when you're 6'10", and you can make these passes that are above the defense. But you definitely saw the whole bag of flashes from Jalen in this game. There's a reason why he has just tantalizing talent, and it was fully on display in that first half. Second half, yeah, uneven, not efficient, a little bit more passive. So, like, a lot of stuff to work on. Jalen's still a young player. He is not fully formed, but the fact that he can do this and not play, like, incredibly well at 21, 9, and 6 in a game where I would say he was, like, more like a B, not like an A, is pretty impressive in itself. Bogey was a really bad defender in this game. That's not new for Bogey. Bogey's defensively is not the same guy he used to be. He did make 4 threes, 3 assists, 17 points, no rebounds. Like, he shot the ball better than he has. He'd been kind of in a slump as well. I've said this before, but I think Bay's slump has covered up for Bogey's slump because Bogey's not been as bad as Bay's has been. But 4 of 9 from 3 is fine. But I think defensively, his shortcomings stood out in this one, especially in transition. He was one of the problems there as the Hawks were getting beaten up in that aspect. And then DeJounte, 23, 7, and 7 for DeJounte in 33 minutes. He actually had exactly 23 points on 23 shooting possessions because he was not efficient in this game. He was 5 of 12 from 2, 2 of 7 from 3. Got to the line 8 times, though. That's actually good for DeJounte. He's not usually a high foul drawer. So not super efficient, but made a bunch of plays. He was fine in this game. I don't think he was any problem with DeJounte on the whole in this one. Led the team in scoring. But, you know, I do the game, sort of the game within a game of like who played well in this game for the Hawks. Guys who performed above their normal baselines, basically no one, I would say. There were some guys who played okay in this one. I thought Bay was pretty solid. Capella in the middle of the game, Jalen in the first half. DeJounte was fine. Patty Mills in the first half, but like no one played capital G good. And a couple of guys, Garrison especially, was way below his baseline. Kong was below his baseline, etc. So just a lost game in a lot of ways. Not a whole lot else to add, and a blowout loss. And we'll have more coming up later this week. A brief sort of news / trade catch up here before we get out of here on this fine. Now, I guess it's now Thursday morning as I'm recording this podcast. Not a ton going on trade rumor wise in the last 2 days as I recorded. I would encourage you to listen to the last podcast and all the podcasts, honestly. But I've been doing a little bit of a trade segment on all of these podcasts in recent days. My pal Jake Fisher, who's been on this podcast before, good friend of mine, did report, quote, the Hawks at present are searching for a pair of first-round picks plus a starting level player for DeJounte Murray, end quote. There are some qualms about what a, quote, starting level player actually means. For me, that would be like a real rotation level guy who is not on an expiring contract, personally. Because obviously, this deal, if it happens for DeJounte, would not be focused on this year. It'd be more of the future. So, like, for instance, Spencer Dinwiddie was thrown around to me. He's on an expiring deal. Like, he would not qualify. I know he is a starting level player, you could argue, but certainly not somebody who's going to like probably stick around long term for the Hawks, et cetera, et cetera. I said this on Twitter, got some pushback, but I believe it. I am skeptical that they will get that reported asking price. I think Jake is right that that's what they're asking for, but I will be surprised. I'm not saying it's impossible. I would be surprised if the Hawks got 2 real first-round picks and what I would describe as a starting level player on a non-expiring contract. Could they get that? Sure. I'd be surprised. So we'll see. And I do think, though, smartly, the Hawks are trying to market that like that right now. And look, it's a little bit cooler right now behind the scenes than it was a week to 10 days ago. That could just be the Hawks try not to be desperate and dampen down the notion that they actually have to do something before the deadline. You try to increase your leverage. So once the like flurry of activity happened about a week and a half ago, where it seemed like there might be a deal like any minute, once that stopped, it might be smart from the front office to kind of like play a little bit slow. They have 2 more weeks to go, but it's a little bit cooler right now, I will say, behind the scenes than it has been. That's all I have on that. Nothing really new on the rumor front, so stay tuned for more on that as we get going further and further toward the deadline, which is again in 2 weeks from today as you listen to this podcast on Thursday. One bit of non-trade news is that Trae Young was named to the 41-player pool of candidates for the Olympic team for the U.S. this summer in Paris. And of course, does not mean he's going to make the team, but he's at least in play and on the player pool roster. He was pretty outspoken last year about wanting to play and being not happy that they was not asked to play. I understand that. He probably should have been on that team, given who was not playing for the USA. I don't think if I had to guess right now, Trae's going to make the team, but I think at a bare minimum, he should have been on the list, and he was. So that's something. We'll keep an eye on that, I'm sure. And if he makes the team, I'll be covering it in depth on this podcast. If he doesn't, then probably a little bit less, but alas, that's coming up after the season is actually over. All right, before we get out of here, last thing, the Hawks play again on Friday against Dallas at home. PSA, that's actually an early tip-off. It's a 7 o'clock game on, I believe it's NBA TV, out of market, and of course local stuff actually over the air on TV, etc. A pretty tough turnaround again, schedule-wise. The Hawks had this bizarre 2-game West Coast trip with neither an off day before or an off day after. Now, they had an off day from games, but that's a normal travel day. So usually when you go to the West Coast, you have an extra day somewhere. Nope. And before that, they had a back-to-back. So like a weird schedule run here for the Hawks. I will say, once they get home, they have that game on Friday, and then they actually start a 6-game homestand. So it's a little bit friendlier now for a while, which is probably going to be nice for the Hawks in a lot of ways. Dallas is having a solid year, not a special year, I would say, at this point. The Mavs lost tonight at home to the Suns by a pretty lopsided margin. They're 24-20, so that's a winnable game. Still not one that I would say the Hawks are like super duper favorites in, but we'll see about Trae Young's status between now and then. And that's always an interesting get together when the Mavs and Hawks play, especially in Atlanta. So we'll have coverage of that game as we always will. I might have a show on Thursday. I don't know quite yet what's happening. I have some irons in the fire, but please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. Please also rate and review the show. If the podcast player of choice actually uses the word follow instead of subscribe, same thing. YouTube likes are appreciated as well. Ratings, reviews, please subscribe and also share the podcast. If you are a fan of the show or if you enjoy the show in any way, please find someone in your life and share the podcast with them or share on social media or both. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Also write about the Hawks on a regular basis at patreon.com/BT Rowland. I appreciate everyone listening. Please forgive anything that I might have said that was off the rails on this podcast because as I'm recording this, it's about 2 a.m. Eastern time, so I am pretty tired at this point. But back at home on regular hours this weekend, we'll have more coverage of what's going on with the Hawks. I really do appreciate everybody listening to the show. Subscribe, rate, review, and with all that said, we'll see you at the very latest after the game on Friday.